Welcome, Kalpana Peddibhotla, Executive Director of the South Asian American Justice Collaborative and an immigration attorney for over 20 years. Kalpana is going to address some questions on the H-1B visa program, which has been debated extensively over the past 3 weeks and since the existence of its program for the most part. So welcome, Kalpana. I would like to start out with just a very broad question. Could you talk about the H-1B visa at large and what it's contributed to the American economy?
Sure. Thank you so much, Sunita. I'd be happy to share more of my thoughts about the H-1B program. And also just to clarify, our organization, SAJCA, we are a new legal nonprofit, a civil rights organization focused on serving the South Asian community in the United States. Our aim is to protect the civil and human rights of our communities. The H-1B program is one that is often used by Indian immigrants. It's over 70% of people who use the H-1B program hail from India. This program allows U.S. employers to hire highly skilled foreign workers in specialized fields. Largely, they end up being in the STEM fields. It's also known as they're placed in something called specialty occupations, which means those occupations require that the person holds a degree related to that field above a bachelor's degree, and that person has that related degree. The program itself,
just to clarify, it has to be above a bachelor's degree.
Yes, and I think somewhere in the press or somewhere out there there's a statement that it can even people with an associate's degree can get into an H-1B. That's a mischaracterization. It means that you have to have a bachelor's or the equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's degree. So if somebody has an associate's degree, then they would likely have to have several years of additional experience in the actual occupation to be able to qualify and have that translate into a bachelor's degree. The bachelor's degree itself, that requirement is that whatever degree that's earned abroad must be equivalent to a U.S. bachelor's degree. So it's not that their degrees are different than ours. They may have different qualifications there, but that ultimately they must satisfy the U.S. requirements for a bachelor's degree. And in fact, every H-1B applicant who earns their degree from abroad, the employer must submit an education evaluation showing how that degree is the same equivalent to a U.S. bachelor's degree. And I want to mention, it's not just people from abroad. The H-1B program, it offers 85,000 visas each year. That's an annual cap on visas. That includes a separate that includes 20,000 that are set aside for workers with advanced U.S. degrees, meaning they were earned in the United States, at least a master's or above. There's a lot of conversation around, well, are we underpaying these H-1B workers? And is that the reason why, companies are hiring them? That's actually the process for hiring an H-1B worker requires the employer to first obtain something called a labor condition application, or an LCA, with the Department of Labor, where they are certifying that they're going to be paying the prevailing wage, the median prevailing wage. So the idea that they're undercutting a U.S. worker's wage, I think, is belied by the structure itself, which requires that you have to first obtain a wage that is matching the prevailing wage as set forth by our own Department of Labor. A majority of H-1B workers are not only paid the median prevailing wage, but they're paid above that wage compared to U.S. workers. There's a Cato Institute report that ranks H-1B workers as the top 10% of all wages in the United States. We can see the labor condition applications that are filed with the Department of Labor, and those show what the actual wages that are being paid. And by and large, they are paid a fairly substantial wage. And we also know what industries that they are in, and those wages are set by the Department of Labor.
And in Kalpana, in your 20 years of practicing immigration law, have you seen abuse of the H-1B program?
I'm sure it exists, right? It's not like anything in where there's a benefit that there may be people that are abusing the system. But we have about 10 plus years ago, the government instituted a fraud and detection unit that was specifically specialized in worksite enforcement. And it was primarily worksite enforcement related to H-1Bs. And I think even there, I think there's statistics for the site visits that were done. The actual violations that they found were on the lower percentage of those site visits. So there's already a system to me that shows where we have to, where the government does check to see if the position is being properly filled or not, and all of those things. There's so many safeguards that are actually put into it. For example, when an employer is going to hire an H-1B worker, they have to post the labor condition application, the LCA, in a conspicuous place on the work site for at least 7 days. And so if there was concerns, U.S. workers would have an opportunity to raise those concerns either directly to the employer or directly to our government.
Interesting. Just to address another concern before we move on, is there a sufficient labor force in the US that can meet the needs of our tech industry, or do we have to rely on workers from India and China?
Well, look, I'm not an economist, right?
Yeah.
And nor am I an employer of H-1B workers. The idea of this program is to be able to allow flexibility for our U.S. employers to be able to source workers from any place in the world, including the United States, to fill roles that they need. That's the concept. They are specialty occupations, and so which require a minimum set of education and skill sets to be able to work in those jobs. So that's conceptually, that's what it is. Is there a U.S. worker that could equally compete for that? Of course, but that's not the point of this program, is to give some flexibility, at least to our employers, to find workers wherever they may be. And I think U.S. employers are saying, well, there is a need. We are having a gap, and we already know that from basic statistics out there about we do have low, we have we're not able to fill all the jobs in this country, and H-1B workers are another way to kind of help us expand our opportunities. The other thing I would note is that H-1B workers are actually often complementary workers, which can increase opportunities for other sort of higher skill roles or other management positions. They contribute to the economy directly, bringing in much needed tax dollars, and they're considered one of the programs that are called a job multiplier. And there is ample economic statistics that support that as well.
Okay. So Senator Sanders on the Senate floor introduced an amendment to the Laken-Riley bill, the much disputed Laken-Riley bill, which the House passed. And I wanted to ask you about the three pieces of it that he has suggested. First of all, raising fees to U.S. employers to be able to employ H-1B workers. Is that something you would support?
Well, I think the fees that are there already have been, since I started practicing immigration law, I think they've doubled or tripled. An employer is paying minimally just in fees because they often have to do something called premium processing so that they can get hire somebody on at the speed of business needs to move. They're paying over $5,000 just in the fees that they pay the government. On top of that, they're hiring lawyers to file those cases. So, and employers can pay, if you take in all their costs, you're looking at over $5,000 and up to $10,000 or more just for that single applicant, something they do not have to do if it's a U.S. worker, which is sort of begs the kind of common sense question as to, would you be sourcing workers from abroad and paying those upfront costs before you've even seen their performance, and this potentially, unless you felt like you needed to fill a role and that you didn't have that person here.
Yeah. So the next portion of his amendment talks about increasing the wages for H-1B workers. And you said that they are on par with what American workers would get.
Yeah, I think like unless there's evidence really that goes the other direction, other beyond sort of the kind of anecdotal information that might be out there, the numbers do not support the idea that H-1B workers are paid less. They actually run the other direction. They're often paid more. And that's been my experience, if we're speaking anecdotally. That's been my experience as an immigration attorney, is that my clients have often, told me all of the difficulties that they have in having to pay a higher wage to an H-1B employee, because they've got to pay not only just the prevailing wage, but they're aiming to pay the median prevailing wage in order to ensure that there's no additional scrutiny on their applications for roles that people may have just come out of school, maybe just finished their master's degree, and maybe a U.S. worker they'd be able to pay less, but they're not able to find the workers to fill the role.
Interesting. And he spoke about making H-1Bs portable so the workers are not what he calls indentured servants to their employers.
I think that language is concerning to me. I think it's concerning to us at Sajco because there's a history behind that language. There's a history that's a colonial history, and I think that's one that is a little bit. It concerns me how it was just thrown about, and that it wasn't, and that it continued to be thrown about in his written statement. And it's not based on the actual way that the H-1B program works. An H-1B employee can absolutely transfer and go to another employer. I have filed those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those applications. In fact, that's pretty much the regular application that you file. Once somebody gets in the door one place, they may find a better opportunity elsewhere, and they will transfer their to that employer, and the H-1B continues to go with that employer. So I mean, they're allowed to move on an H-1B. So that's not true. There's also portability, and that's a technical term in immigration law, related to when somebody has got their green card filing happening, and there are certain steps that they can take to port over and continue to extend their H-1B. So I think that notion that somebody's, first off, they are paid and highly paid employees, so I don't think indentured servitude is the correct language to use, but also they are not handcuffed to that job. Now, people may feel frustrated with their employers, right? I assume I felt frustrated with my employers at one point in time. It doesn't mean that they don't have an option. It just means that they are on a visa, they're on a work visa. They have to have another sponsor if they want to go to the other employer on a work visa in the United States, which was, to my understanding, is what this part of this debate is about, is that we do want the workers to be able to do that.
Yeah.
With regard to a portability, it's another part of our immigration system that I think probably should be addressing the needs of both U.S. workers as well as foreign workers, and that is removing the per country caps for green cards. And this is what keeps Indian nationals on H-1Bs for years, because they are not able to, like every other national in the United States, they're not able, every foreign national from other countries, they're not able to get onto a green card within a few years of living and working in the United States.
Right. I've read anecdotally that the wait time is at least 8 decades. Is that a reasonable?
Yeah, so the issue is that I think the wait time is 10 plus years, but what happens is that it's such an oversubscribed that
Right.
it keeps pushing it out. And then, yes, people can wait an entire lifetime or more until they're couple generations before they might see their green card through an employment-based petition if they were born in India. And this again relates to sort of why we have H-1B workers in the United States and why are they coming from India? India produces the largest number of software engineers in the world.
Are you and Sajko concerned that President-elect Donald Trump is going to gut the H-1B visa program?
So it's hard to know because I think everybody else is reading the papers like we are, and wondering which side of the Trump coalition is going to win this debate. But I can tell you what I saw under his first administration, where I did actively practice immigration law under his administration, as I had for three prior administrations, that the two prior, that he handicapped the program through how it was administered. So the program, and in a way that didn't really seem to make certain sense, because at the end of the day, the same level of approvals occurred under the Biden administration as they did under the Trump administration. And so what ended up happening is really he delayed the processing of these applications, for which employers lost time in trying to onboard employees. And as a result, some of those workers, we lost them altogether, and we lost them in competition to our northern neighbor, Canada, which actually actively sought out to bring people who would have ordinarily been on an H-1B in the United States to Canada. So we lost a level of competitiveness then. But overall, the program was actively scrutinized under the Trump administration, administratively, sort of behind the scenes. And I used to say in those days that he was able to change the program without having to officially change the program. And it's sort of like just trying to fix a program that's not really broken, but becomes an easy target because it's foreign workers who don't often have a political voice. People really do want to talk about the H-1B program. They need to look behind the rhetoric and get into the statistics, because they are published. It's a program that has a lot of transparency. And I know there is a lot of rhetoric about H-1B workers, even from all sides. H-1B workers are better than US workers, or that kind of nonsense. That's not, I don't think that should be how we analyze whether this is a good program for America. I think we should look at the statistics behind it. And I do think that we shouldn't use inflammatory language going the other direction either, in characterizing H-1B workers in language that's not befitting to what the program actually is. Final thing I'd like to say is that, as a civil rights organization, we are concerned around rhetoric that demonizes groups of people and uses characteristics of those groups in harmful ways, and especially in this context when it's about with facts that are not actually backed up in evidence.
You've got folks on either end of the spectrum demonizing this program. On one hand, you have Senator Sanders. On the other hand, you have Steve Bannon. So could you talk a little bit about that? The fact that folks on both sides of the aisle have demonized workers in this program.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what drives them. I think what's at issue is we're entering a place where where we do need to promote U.S. workers and opportunities for Americans, but we don't. But by taking a program that admits at most 65,000 people and 20,000 additional people who have earned degrees into the United States, and using that to explain why U.S. workers in unrelated fields are being harmed, I think is just not honest discourse. And I think I would hope that our leaders had more of a fact-based approach to it.
Are you confident that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who both come out of tech and biotech, will ensure that the program continues on?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if I don't even know if they're really the best spokespeople for it, because I think they are part of the problem of creating a very incendiary language that just inflames the tensions. I think that some of the language around belittling U.S. workers is I don't think that's good for this conversation, you know? So I hope that in general that the policymakers will see the value of the H-1B program. It's an important program. It's brought in significant workers to this economy and has propelled us forward. And there's evidence all over the map with tech companies that are led by people who were formerly on H-1Bs.